to Mindcrime Liberty Show with me, Swithun Dobson, and him, Tim Patton. Today we discuss abortion. When does human life begin? Is a fetus a human? Is abortion immoral? Should it be legal? Or is it even a positive good for society? Tim.
Well, first of all, I'm going to state my general position. I'm a plumb-line libertarian in the sense that I am pro-choice as it stands now. But I'm going to explain my pro-choice argument before we get into the arguments pro-choice, pro-life, what its relative implications are. I'm first going to muddy the waters, and partly I'm going to muddy the waters in favor of the pro-life people. I'm going to read a quote that was reported by LifeSite News, and this is by America's favorite boogeyman, Mr. Charlottesville himself, Richard Spencer. And I love this quote because I think it's hilarious in some ways. I think this quoting Spencer. I think that some people who are in the alt-right want to believe that the anti-abortion crusade is just inherently traditionalist. That is about making women take responsibility for their children. That's going to make women become mothers, whether they like it or not. I'm a bit skeptical of this view that abortion would have inherently traditional consequences. I think when we think about abortion, we often think about these careerist women who otherwise would be part of families, but instead have abortion out of pure selfishness and greed. The fact is that it isn't like that. Those highly intelligent career women will have abortions on occasion, but to be honest, they're using contraception and they're avoiding pregnancy is what they're doing. And this is where it gets really interesting. The people who are having abortions are generally very often Black or Hispanic, or people from very poor circumstances, to be honest. Now, I'm going to take the data. That was Richard Spencer. I'm going to take the data from everyone's favorite organization, the left's favorite organization, the infallible, the one, the only CDC's. And this is the CDC numbers from 2015. And I want you to guess. There were 650,000 total abortions, and of the actually reported in the hilarious statistics, states that they didn't report based on race are states like California, Florida, Louisiana, North Carolina, and New York. Those are some of the states that didn't report. So of the 600,000 number, that's how many abortions occurred in 2015. I just picked a random year. That was the last year we had Barack Obama himself as president, so I just picked that year. Of the 338,000 reported by race with reliable numbers, what percentage, you can say, give me the percentage or the number, do you think is the white, and this is self-described, is the white population or the white non-Hispanic? Swithun, you want to take a guess?
Let's say 45%.
It's actually 36.9%, which comes out to 124,000. And what do you think is of the Black percentage?
The Black percentage must be really high because depends on the population of the Hispanics. I'm going for the Black one, like, I don't know, 50%.
Well, it's 36%, but which means the Blacks and whites. The Black 121,000 now this is only states, and if you look at the demographic makeup of the states that don't report based on ethnicity, it's probably higher than that. But I'm starting off with the statistics just to somewhat muddy the water. So you have 124,000 white abortions, 121,000 Black abortions, and there's a change of other groups as well as Hispanics and other groups. But I wanted to start that number off just to sort of muddy the waters. You know, I am going to make the pro-choice argument, but I want to sort of identify to A, pro-choice Christians, and B, pro-choice politically correct libertarians, that some politically incorrect people are also pro-choice. For people who are fans of virtue signaling and those type of activities. The abortion debate to me is one of the more interesting debates in that regard. And it gets even funnier because, the young Democratic Socialist America at Harvard had a convention, and here we have Cornel West, Michael Brooks, and a Planned Parenthood activist on stage together. This is a rather strange world we live in here. But I just wanted to clear that out of the way ahead of time before we get started. just to sort of set the stage. Now, the argument about pro-choice, I think, centers on the definition of what is abortion and what that thing in itself in the womb is. Is the fetus a person or a cow? I say cow, but I should be careful because the animal rights group might think the cow is worth saving. So be careful about that using. But in general, we can eat cows. We can basically test them. We can milk them. We can break apart their identity. We can put all sorts of things. No one really cares. And no one really cared 150 years ago about what happened to cows either. So I think the first question about, and one of the key questions in this debate is what exactly is this? And I'm of the position I'm not sure. Agnostically, it's up to this comes to more meta-ethical position. I mean, right now, society-wise, we don't think it's a person, and the reason we don't think it's a person is A, we allow people to do it, and B, we don't prosecute the mothers or the doctors who do it. This is a while back in the when Trump was running for office back in 2015, he had a Freudian slip for some, but I think a true moral viewpoint is that Trump said, we should punish the mothers. I'm paraphrasing. He might not have said those exact words, but that sentiment is true. Like, if you really think that's a person, okay, if I went to an infant ward and just shot it up and said, or dropped poison in there, or so forth, and shot it up, I would be, considered a murderer. So that's the first view. So in my view, one of the reasons society doesn't think it's a person is we don't, and the pro-life movement included, some of the pro-life movement, Jeff Durbin and some of the others will have pragmatic argument, but at their core believe that it is a murder, and will treat it with some. But Swithun, what do you have to say about this first point? Swithun?
I think that society in general has a somewhat schizophrenic view as to whether it's a person or not. The reason I mention this is if a pregnant woman is killed, at least in England, you could be done for like double homicide. So the actual killing of so when someone other than the mother or somebody who is not contracted by the mother, in the case of the abortion doctor, kills the infant in utero, that's actually considered murder. Now, I don't know up to from what I don't remember, but I think that actually society has a somewhat less obvious view as to whether they consider it a person or not. That's all I wanted to say at this point.
Oh, I agree that society has some schizophrenic. I agree society has some schizophrenic views, but at some point my more point was to center in on the pro-life here, the pro-life advocates, and actually at the Soho Forum, great debate occurred between Walter Block and I should remember her name. She was quite good. She was actually advocating for pro-life. Walter Block was advocating pro-choice, like a good pro-life libertarian. And one of the points that she made, well, she actually opened up her statement by saying that she does not want a war on. We do not want to prosecute the mothers. But I view that as inconsistent. And this is where the slave debate actually has this. The slavery debate in the leading up to the 1860s has a lot in common with this, for many reasons. I mean, for one reason, there's a great joke that once circulated. I saw, the lukewarm Christians are pro-choice, the fundamentalist Christians are pro-life, and some fundamentalist Christians think that it's a positive good, which is one of the points you made in our opening statements here, that some people do actually think abortion is positive good. We'll get to those arguments later. We'll put those aside for a moment. But the question over what exactly is the fetus, my point is only to say is that a lot of pro-life people, when you ask them, don't really think that what the mother is doing is a crime. If the mother took a pillow to a 1-year-old, without a doubt, and you could prove that, without a doubt, anyone who did that is considered a murderer. Correct? I would assume you would think that's correct. And since yes. they do not also They will make pragmatic concerns. They'll say, well, we don't want to do this. But this goes back to like the slave debate in the same way that, like, well, we Quakers will hold that, Jefferson Davis is okay. We just want Jefferson Davis to let his slaves go. We don't want to prosecute Jefferson Davis. But really, if someone did that kind of labor system today, no one would think that wise. Jeff Durbin, I think some pro-life people hold that view as the case. Some pro-life view hold that there are also the view that you could just say we don't want to prosecute murders. But considering that most people have no problem putting Dylan Roof or the New Zealand mosque shooter in jail, it's not. It's rather. We go back to, does the left want to abolish the state? Most people do not. An actual existing murders that people don't like, or they want to put the guy that shot the cop, the cop, I can't think of his name, in jail. So they do think there should be a punishment for murder, and they're not applied. That's my main point is. So with Swithun, let's get into this entity that's in the womb here. What do you think it is? Do you say it's a person, or do you say it's a glob of cells? Do you say it's a helpless person with an address? Like, what exactly is your view? What is the views of some philosophers or thinkers that you think are pertinent on this?
So the question really revolves around here is what actually is a person? What is a human as such? Now, I mean, we could get into lots of deep water here if we wished to. Taking a definition like Boethius defines a person as an individual substance of a rational nature. Now, the thing is, what we want to do is humans, we observe the world and we see that there are different animals and they are different in certain respects. And going back to Aristotle, the way that you would distinguish sort of humans from what the specific difference was between, say, humans or other mammals was rationality. That would be what marked out humans as being different. And I think that's relatively uncontroversial so far. The question then arises, well, if you essentially have an irrational human, are they in fact human? And this actually, and I think when you get to the abortion debate on what's a human, you get related issues, which is, well, if people are severely disabled, for example, are they actually human? Because if you take it, say, reasoning capacity, if someone has sort of like degenerative brain condition, are they in fact human? So it raises all these sort of other issues, and to be consistent, and this is, I've never heard a position which holds that the child in utero is not a human, which does not then also extend to the severely disabled. People like Peter Singer will actually admit this being the case. Peter Singer's definition of a human is, from memory, from listening to him, was somebody who had a memory of themselves. And this is why Peter Singer thinks infanticide is justifiable, I think up until the age of 1, because he argues they don't have a memory of themselves. Now, obviously, if you have severe dementia cases or things like that, there may well be a point at which you cease to have a memory of yourself in the relevant sense, and therefore cease to be human. Now, would we then think that killing or getting a shotgun and blowing out the brains of such an individual would be okay? Well, probably not, although Peter Singer may argue that is the case. So what is my position? I would say that once you have a fertilized egg, you have all the DNA there, which constitutes a new individual substance. And it has internal directedness to become a mature adult, which will then demonstrate its rational capacities. When it's like a zygote, it is still actually a rational animal. It's just that its rational capacities are frustrated by its immaturity, but it is still actually a rational substance. at that point, and therefore is actually a human. The advantage of this position is that it means things like, let's say, argumentational ethics, you can apply to all humans rather than anybody who can actually engage in argumentation. So, for example, you could have a situation where a human under Hoppian argumentational ethics isn't, let's say, can't talk and can't write. Or how can they, leaving aside they could do, let's say they don't know sign language either. They can't engage in argumentation, and therefore, in that sense, argumentational ethics doesn't apply to them, and therefore they can't be self-owners, etc., etc. So I think this is a consistent position to hold, and also explains how someone could be human even though they have no arms or legs. They're a quadriplegic, and various other physical ailments that people may have, that they are still sort of human. And so this position is based sort of traditionally off Aristotle, and then is developed by people like Aquinas and more contemporary circles, some of the natural law philosophers like Edward Fazer, Rob Koons. They're two contemporary ones who would, I don't know if Koons has written on it, but Fazer has, at least on his blog. So I would make the case that it is in fact a human. It's just that his capacities are frustrated. On to the interesting point, about how saying a lot of pro-lifers won't want to punish the mothers. It's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who knows the Italian pro-life situation, and actually in Italy there's a pro-life group there who's trying to get a referendum on a law change which would actually prosecute abortion doctors and also mothers as well. I think the reason the pro-lifers in the America and the US don't advocate it is probably because abortion is relatively accepted by a lot of people anyway. So prosecuting mothers would go down badly. And also a lot of the advocates of pro-life anti-abortion position that the pro-life groups choose to use tend to be, in many cases, women who have had abortions and they later regretted it. So it seems to be primarily a strategic position, and also possibly that they think that abortions primarily happen because they're influenced by nasty men, and it isn't women who just want to get ahead in their or anything like that. So it's all these evil men around. So I think to some extent they may be influenced by forms of feminism to some extent. So that would be, I think, an explanation as to why they don't advocate prosecution of others. I mean, the obvious conclusion is you should. I mean, if you think that abortion is effectively murder, the mother is basically what the Don is to the hitman. Is like, well, you're paying the hitman to do the job, in the same way the mother is effectively. Obviously, it's more indirect in most cases because the mother's using the state to then pay the abortion doctor, but you get the idea. So that'd be, I say, my overview of the sort of pro-life positions as held in various countries, and my position of what constitutes human.
The point about Singer, about would it also apply to disablists? This goes back to my opening statement about I'm pro-choice, but I'm going to be rather politically incorrect at times about my pro-choiceness, for better or for worse. Iceland, for example, cures Down syndrome with eugenics. And actually, the more we know about fetuses, the more we'll be able to do certain things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if other things start. We could, maybe autism, maybe other diseases. So, anyone who knows anyone with autism or any of the other, lots of other diseases, we could figure out, well, this person's very likely to do that. So what I find is interesting is that, it's generally considered the politically correct position to be pro-choice. But, I might hold it for, but there's also other tertiary arguments there that which make it rather strange. You're correct that Singer, I think, does do that way. But at least Singer's more honest about that in that regard as well. And I would say it's generally strategic concerns, and a bit of wishy-washiness then about that. But I'm just saying that leaves an opening here where where at least I can maybe stand on firmer ground than so the it's just one of the problems I was just highlighting in their worldview / outlook. Now, my next question I think I'm going to get in before is let's go to the before. Let's go to the actual mechanics of this, and I'm going to get into one of the related issues, which was point brought up by the Mr. Politically Incorrect quote, is the issue of contraception. As well as fertilization. These are Jeff Durbin was once involved in debate. He's a Calvinist, pro-life pastor, and one of the side points they brought up was fertilized eggs. I mean, if you go to you can get these eggs fertilized in outside in a lab. You can create all these wombs, and there's articles about like you have these sort of fertilized eggs, thousands of them sitting around. And technically, in some ways, they're all proto-life, and say they're the sort of elements of life. So there's a huge number of these. If you kill these in the lab, are you killing a person? So that's my first question. I'm going to get into some other questions with it. What would you hold on this debate? I don't. Again, I think I've fairly charitably made a lot of points in favor of your position. But I still think there are other side issues here which need to be, hammered out. And modern technology is both a feature and a bug in driving this debate, because, if you had first of all, an abortion in before 1900 or 1930 consisted of having children and killing it. So Mr. Anthony Comstock, when he was going after abortions, this is a totally different era. I mean, most abortions are the day after pill or things like that. I looked at statistics about that. Now, again, there's a huge amount of unseen data that you can't really know. I fully self-medication, so forth. But before a certain period in the past, there was no such thing as effective birth control or effective abortion. That's a modern technology in a way too. Abortion as is practiced now, but there's also, if you have a child at 20 weeks, I'm not sure what the earliest child they've done. You have a fairly expensive hospital ward. You can put them in those little boxes and they'll live. I mean, some people in my extended family, I think, was born sometime in the 30 or some week range, the early 30 week range. That's not unheard of. So modern technology helps the pro-life people. But it also hurts them because abortion is sort of a modern technology, but also this debate. So what do you think is the role of, let's put aside contraception first. What do you make of the actual role that modern technology played in this issue itself? Swithun?
I think when it comes to, I think the major impact of modern technology on the debate, I think, is primarily IVF more than anything else. You are right that the methods of abortion were more limited in certain respects up until a certain date, which is uncontroversial, which makes sense. On the sort of direct sort of killing as such, when it comes to kind of keeping the children alive, I mean, yes, that then you get into questions as to, is it worth trying to keep, let's say, a premature birth at, let's say, 22 weeks? Is it worth putting all the money in to keep them alive, for example, when they're likely to die or like they're going to be severely disabled or whatever? I mean, and this gets to a lot of the sort of debates as to how much, whether medical intervention is worthwhile. And this starts, I think, primarily in the 60s. Is it worth undergoing surgery which made you quadriplegic and you could survive for longer, or is it better just to live as well as you can and then die? The fertilized eggs, though, is a much trickier situation because under traditional IVF, Now, I mean, this then raises the question: to what extent would IVF have been prohibited if you take an anti-abortion position? Does it necessarily entail that? I'm not entirely sure. I mean, you could certainly make the claim that you're deliberately creating, and you're deliberately creating in a way that you're not deliberately creating by natural procreative means. And you have a high probability, at least to begin with IVF, that if you take the position I do, that human is going to die. And especially if you have a situation, well, that's only if you had one egg, because the traditional way of doing IVF was to create a lot of them. And then did they implant all of them? Sometimes they wouldn't, and they just dispose of some of them. But the question as to what's to do with the implanted eggs, I mean, obviously one solution is just to get surrogacy. And that's what some pro-life people have argued for. Others have argued that actually it's an intractable problem. We can't really do very much about it. I think some of the Catholic ones I've listened to is basically just baptize them and then just turn the freezer off. That is I'm not entirely sure what I think on that. Although, as I say, you could easily make the surrogacy argument if you wanted to sort of just maintain the life and have no other ones created in the lab. Or if you did, you only ever created a single one for IVF purposes and implanted it, and it either survived or it didn't. And so you would never have a situation where you just got freezers full of fertilized eggs.
I'm just going to cut in here for a second. I bring this up because this in some ways IVF is a feature, a gift. Plenty of people who can't have children, plenty of Christian couples, I think, will do this because before I get into some of the other arguments, because one of the things is that this is the point the lady brought up in the debate with the pro-life one, is that creating life in some ways is a random process. It's not like the amount of agency involved in either actors. It's a ton of of course you can maybe make yourself disabled and do this, but it's a kind of inagency involved, and plenty of people cannot have children, but can still do the act itself, but they just can't have children. And this is a way to create children. So this is actually a pro-life argument, is creating more persons. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah. I mean, then you. Yeah, but that moves on to the question of what does it mean to be pro-life? I mean, I suppose I would define my position more precisely as consistent anti-murder rather than pro-life as such, because I suppose you could make the claim that the true pro-life position is the fertility maximalist position, which I suppose is the view that The Handmaid's Tale kind of takes to be the true position. Margaret Atwood, that's who it was, the author. So I whilst some people would say, see, I mean, on IVF, I don't have a 100% worked out position on IVF, but I don't like it. For one of the reasons I mentioned before, I think the probability of death is significantly higher, and so I think it's a problem on that basis. And also, the children born of IVF don't do very well on average. I was listening to what's he called, Ed Dutton. One of the issues is that, and this is something Richard Spencer would be in agreement with, because I always like to be popular, that when you're picking the sperm to impregnate the egg in IVF, you basically can't, the current technology, you can't distinguish between whether that sperm is actually any good or not. Whereas in normal procreative means, the one that survives is basically the fittest of the one that's dumped at the time, because he has to get through all the defenses of the female, which isn't the case there. And so points to various things in the recent video on the Jolly Heretic channel, that actually the sort of life outcomes, etc., of children born from IVF are significantly worse. And actually this is passed on actually to the children born naturally of those who were born via IVF. So there's various general sociological reasons to be generally disapproving. On a purely ethical level, I think it's dubious at best. but as I say, I don't have 100% worked out position on it.
Oh, I don't mean to. I don't bring this up as a. Well, I guess in some ways it is a quote unquote gotcha question, but it is a related question. It might be distinct, but it is related. I brought up I'm glad you brought up the Mr. Politically Incorrect quote, and he probably would be in agreement. But I brought that, as I pointed out with the slavery debate, one of the points that the pro-slave people once made, which I always found was interesting. Actually, Noam Chomsky himself made this argument. Noam Chomsky was once asked about his debate about Michel Foucault, and since Chomsky gets triggered when some people bring it up, he sometimes goes into weird tangents. And one of his tangents was he brought up the northern argument for one of the southern retorts to the slaverman argument was that well, what about northern mill workers? Their conditions are worse than our slaves. You treat your mill workers and your coal mine workers much worse than we treat our slaves. And I love that argument because it's somewhat hilarious. But I think in a way there are certain degrees in which there's certain pro-life arguments that, there's the pro-life position and there's the fertility maximization position. They have a lot in common, but they have some differences. They have some differences. And one of my criticisms of the natural law people is they at times the issues aren't as clearly the issues aren't really clearly delineated as they laid out to be. They may have been clearer in 1850 with less modern tech or some date in the past. I know there's bizarre histories of theories aside. There is some date in the past where there was no such thing as the day after pill as an effective thing like that. So there is some differences between those positions because, I was also watching the Quaker view on slavery, and they said, like, well, why do you oppose slavery? And there was always sort of two views. There was like, well, slavery is a form of stealing someone's labor, but if you say that, then isn't that just a sort of vaguely Marxist argument that you're stealing you could just by the capitalism you could just steal, and that you Quaker business owner are also doing that too. So I do like the implications of this. I just want to lay out, one of the questions some pro-life people might ask is, do you want your mother to abort you? This goes back to like, I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I don't. My earliest memory is like 3, so it just doesn't. It doesn't. It's like a non-relevant. It's a question which I don't have an answer to. Like, I wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be able to answer that question as such. And that as a response. As a response to that, like, the would you want to abort your question. And I want to get into the more harder issues because I think a lot of the easier ground is generally covered. I think in general abortion is a weird / dodgy procedure to get. Because it's generally just not using contraception properly or having not enough time preference to use it. One of those two things. And B, the idea that you create a life and you just want to kill it is a kind of strange argument. There's never problems that come into the position. One of the arguments that some pro-choice Christians will make is say, well, do you care about children that once they're born? Aren't there many children in the orphanage? Well, that is a good point to make. There are children in orphanages and so forth. Maybe in Ancapistan there'd be Gary North Inc. and they just adopt every fetus or whatever have you. And the plenty of Christians do adopt children. I mean, the fundamentalist ones do adopt children. Amy Coney Barrett was made fun of for adopting 2 black children too. So yeah, I want to go on to the more politically, the more dubious, the more related yet distinct issues, which I don't think the anti-murder positions, which you hold, which I think you hold very well, but I don't think it's simply a case of one is anti-murder. But do you have any comments on that before we go into some of the other issues, Swithun?
Yeah, firstly, just to distinguish, I don't think the fertilized eggs in freezers is a difficult position. As I say, I don't 100% know what I think exactly what to do with them. But what I would point out is the fertilized eggs in the freezers is distinct qualitatively from a child in utero. For this reason, the mother's uterus, what it is in a sense what it is for, which is, what it means to be uterus is to have a child inside it. And that is the natural sort of intrinsic functionality of the female body. A freezer is an artifact. It is something that is created, as I say, by humans and putting various substances together, and so therefore can be turned on or turned off. And so even so, the frozen eggs and the baby in utero is a qualitatively different position, and this is for one reason why Judith Jarvis Thompson's violinist analogy fails. If any of you don't know what that is, basically her probably the most famous argument for abortion. There is a violinist who has a kidney disorder, and the Music Lovers Society figured out that, let's say, you, Tim, are the only man in the world who has the right sort of kidneys to keep this guy alive, and this guy needs to be. And so what happens is then in the night, the Music Lovers Society come and kidnap you, Tim, and then hook you up to this machine which attaches you to the violinist. And you need to be there for 9 months, and then magically the guy will be recovered. And then the Judith Jarvis Thompson's argument is, well, Tim, are you legally obligated to stay there for 9 months, or can you leave? Thompson says, well, it'd be nice if you stayed, but there's no real sort of obligation for you to stay. But the point here is there's more ways we could go to the argument, but the crucial disanalogy is when you're hooked up to a machine, that's like an extrinsic relation. And also with your kidneys, there's nothing intrinsic to your kidneys that it's helping somebody else's kidneys. I mean, the point of the kidneys is to filter liquids for the functioning of your individual body. I mean, that's what it means to be a kidney. And so there's a significant disanalogy between sort of keeping somebody in artificial support vis-a-vis the natural intrinsic functioning of the human body. Secondly, the morning after pill is probably the most interesting as to whether an anti-abortionist could defend, because you could claim that it's agnostic, because if it was the case, so it's a position. Now, I don't remember exactly how it works, but if it was the case that it somehow prevented the sperm from fertilizing the egg, which I think it can do on occasion, or flush out the egg, I don't remember exactly how it works, but I think it is possible on occasions that that doesn't happen. And so technically speaking, that would be okay. But I think just on a pragmatic basis, it's a question of whether you keep it legal or not. I mean, the probability is it is actually getting rid of a fertilized egg. Oh, well, it might not actually. I mean, it depends. So that could be abortion. There could be murder. It could not be. It's not immediately clear. But anything beyond that, even with medical intervention, I think would be pretty clearly, so my position is basically murder. Yeah,
I think you're laying out your position fairly well, and I hope I'm playing the role of the counter position somewhat well. One of the problems, I think, again, modern technology, even though I'm somewhat agnostic, maybe a Christian, although I don't think you can actually hold that as views, is Dallas Willard, great apologist, once said that modern technology increases human freedom, which in turn increases human. We have control over our natural environment, much of our environment, much more than a hunter-gatherer society or yeoman farmers. We can dam rivers up. We can, which I think is actually another thought experiment about it. I could be wrong. That could be a slightly different issue. We can dam rivers up. We can take out kidneys. We can transfer kidneys. I can predict, in some religious fundamentalists like some Calvinists, maybe in Gary Northville, there will be no kidney failures because since charity is so high, you can give up your kidney, but you know that if your kidney fails, you'll have a reliable donor to deliver a kidney to you if your only one existing kidney was necessary. So yeah, I think there's a huge amount of related issues around this issue. But I do agree in general that you're laying out a fairly good anti-murder position. But I do think that technology increases our control of our environment. And in a way, birth control is a control of our environment. In the same way that pornography never existed before the invention of television, which I think came from radar screens. I think that was one of the early uses of what is now a modern screen. I think I could be wrong on that history. So like, you see a lot in the pornography day. Again, Anthony Comstock did not have to deal with modern internet technology. Same thing. Technology has changed what we can do for better or for worse. I mean, we can watch great 3D movies too. Now some Amish probably think that's a bad thing, but that's fine in general. I don't see anything wrong with a good movie. But nonetheless, that's my general view on technology. That's one of the reasons why I'm somewhat pro-choice. Although I want to say that people who have abortions in general are somewhat, in general, to me, are somewhat weird. And in the sense that you have a thing that could become a child and you want to kill it. Okay, go ahead. I mean, I don't. That's rather strange. And I think that's the thrust of a lot of what the pro-life argument ought to be. That's more of a positive version of it. You're just taking the sort of don't murder people, which the don't murder people also means that people can exist. So that's a very good thing. And also Walter Block will say that he's pro-life. He likes people to live. That's why he's a capitalist. That's why he's an anarcho-capitalist. So yeah, I would say that. Let me get to my next point. The next point is on the issue of the sort of pre-crime. There's a movie I think Tom Cruise starred. It's called The Minority Report, and I think this is another one of those related issues to the abortion debate, which is somewhat interesting to me, which is the contraception debate. It's worth pointing out that again the effective contraception is a modern, including birth control, is a modern technology. Did not exist in the Song of Songs. It did not exist in the Old Testament, from my understanding. Of course, you can do natural family planning, but still, nonetheless, it's modern technology. And one of the positive. So I'll just ask you outright before I state what I think. Swithun, do you think that contraception is akin to murder as well? I mean, this goes back into the mechanics of the whole action. I've stated that neither actor can control it. Plenty of the two actors, if you pair it up, all males and all available females, there's plenty of people who are both infertile. There's one, all it takes one side. There's plenty of those things. But do you think that contraception in any variety, not of the killing the egg variety, is murder? Like, is this a pre-crime? What exactly is this? And should the pro-life movement care about that, or the anti-murder position?
Taking the strict anti-murder position, no, I don't think there's anything intrinsically problematic with it. There are certain forms of contraception which can make, as it were, spontaneous abortions more likely. So certain pills can change the lining of the uterus such that it makes, if an egg were to be fertilized, it's significantly more likely not to be implanted on the wall. So there's sort of pragmatic arguments to say why that probably isn't a good idea. Whether it really is sort of grossly negligent, maybe not, but it's certainly quite different. Also, but going to things like, let's say, more straightforward ones for the purpose of this, let's take condoms. I mean, is that murder? Well, no, because there's no sort of individual new substance which is there. You have the egg and the sperm, which are both sort of passive, in a sense, and they well, I suppose no, the egg is passive, the sperm isn't, but the egg needs to be worked on by the sperm to create this kind of new substance, and if that hasn't taken place, then of course that isn't going to be murder. Now, that said, could you then make broader arguments as to why contraception may be a bad thing? Well, yes, because you could say that basically contraception reduces the cost of sex and therefore encourages promiscuity, and then sort of like the delay of sort of marriage and children, etc. And so you move away from you have a situation in which you have an environment which has strong biological pressures for whoever you have sex with to kind of marry eventually, because they'll have children, and create a situation in which you have stable environments for the raising of children. There's also the argument that contraception means that you're going to have children later, and having children when you're older are related with more fetal abnormalities. Autism is positively correlated with the age of the father, etc. So you have these issues as well. So on a strict anti-murder position, well, there's nothing intrinsically wrong about it. However, what it can facilitate, for independent reasons, you could make a case against.
All I'm doing is somewhat playing counter position and somewhat laying out some features and bugs in the arguments here. When I go back to my example about slavery, and I say there's two critiques. There's the sort of capitalist critique of slavery. Although if you read Hans Hoppe, it gets even trickier. But there's also the Marxist critique of slavery. By the Marxist critique of slavery, capitalism is also slavery. But by the fetal maximization position, not the fetal maximization, the child maximization position, certain actions are clearly murder-ish. And again, one of the things that the pro-murder-ish, and one of the reasons I do this is I think debates are never purely logical, and for better or for worse. There is an amount of rhetoric and there's an amount of related issue. If you believe X, why don't you, I can demonstrate that there's a somewhat related link to X and Y. Why don't you also think Y? I think you are making a fairly good case that they're not close enough related that you can't do that. But I nonetheless think they are related. It sort of muddies the waters somewhat, for better or for worse. But interestingly, I do think the arguments in generally about family planning are bad or problematic. I think most people would be better off if more children existed. I think most families would be better off. Families, in particular, married two-parent households, would be better off if they had more children than less children. And again, this is another point that's actually critical of the pro-life movement, because plenty of pro-life people only have one or two children. They do not have more than that. They do not have replacement numbers for their population. So this is actually another area where I think it's not brought up. And I'm doing this somewhat self-defense, because libertarians oftentimes, libertarians oftentimes get, oh, well, Albert Mohler was involved in a debate with libertarian. He brought up the abortion issue. Well, I said, and this is somewhat of a counter to some of the Christians who critique libertarians on the issue of abortion. It's like, well, you also need to make a cultural argument why people should have more children, I would argue. And in that case, they don't do a very good job, in my view. And I'm just holding some sort of strict legal theory that says, like, well, it's sort of somewhat strict legal theory and somewhat pragmatic. Because, you can make some David Friedman style, style arguments the same way you can make about drugs or going after guns, prohibiting things. It's hard to do it because it requires a group force to go out and prohibit them. Maybe if you're a pacifist, it's actually impossible to do that. But if you have a state or you have some sort of rights protection agency, you ought to do it. Maybe in Ancapistan, Gary Northville will do that, of course. I've said that before. But nonetheless, I think there are related issues here that muddy the water. One of the key issues, interestingly, is the population bomb, which probably led to the Chinese one-child policy. There's an issue where faulty reasoning, and David Friedman actually wrote a great critique of the population bomb. He couldn't. I don't think his quote was he couldn't sign it. He couldn't sign it. Having more children might actually, in his view, that actually would be better. For a variety of reasons. And this again, this is where it's not always clear that the old, Margaret Sanger types, cutting down the number of children is actually a good thing. This sort of relates to Malthus, the Malthusian trap. That I don't really think those are true. I think we can, we haven't run out we've never run out of, Matt Ridley says, we never run out of non-renewable resource. We only run out of renewable resources. Children are a renewable resource. We can create more of them. And this is where I think Christians have failed, because people only have they don't have enough children. So I think the pro-life people should have another child. I think that's a great argument. I think there was a funny NPR article, hilarious. Someone didn't want to have a second child because of climate change. I think that's hilarious. I think that's a bogus reason not to have any more children. But Swithun, what are your overall comments on this related yet distinct, I'll give you credit that it's distinct, issue of fertility maximization? It clearly plays in a role in the pro-abortion arguments. One, rhetorically, and two, they are somewhat logically related. If you think that humans are primarily consumers, having more Americans or Western Europeans or Britons is a bad thing. It's also related to other areas. If you think whites are mainly bad, having fewer Western Europeans or Americans are bad. So there are issues there that are clearly related. Swithun?
It's certainly the case that the pro-abortionist can have wider cultural and societal concerns at play, rather than just sort of the classic sort of bodily autonomy arguments of the woman. That's certainly true, and as a lot of pro-lifers like to point out, Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist, and so that's certainly true. And then it's kind of related to the Malthusian argument that we're going to get food growth only grows arithmetically, but population grows geometrically, and therefore we're going to get people going to starve effectively, which I think is false. And I do think, I suppose, when it comes to the pro-life movement, the question is, what other causes do they want to bring to themselves, and how do they want to sort of market it? That said, I do think that the number of children being born is in the West too low. I think you can make a good argument that you want at least replacement level. Basically, that if you treat society as a substance, or a different region, an area as a substance, like an organism of certain description, analogously, not literally, of course. A good organism is typically one that is growing, or at least maintaining its sort of same size, broadly speaking. It's not something which is progressively getting small. I mean, something getting progressively smaller is a sign of it's dying. In many cases, not all cases, but in general. So I think you can make a case on that basis that you want at least replacement level, which would mean there's a norm that married couples, your aim is 3, because obviously you can't aim for 2.2 or whatever the replacement is, depending on how many people get to reproduce. It's either 2.2 or 2.1, depending. Also, I think, as you pointed out, I think children, I think it is better for the children in general to have more siblings and people around them. I mean, I've never met somebody who was an only child who liked being an only child. I've never met one who said. Now, of course, it might just be the case that those who didn't like being an only child told me, and the ones who did like it didn't think to mention it. But we're kind of designed to have reasonable levels of human interaction with lots of different people who are related to you. And so, yeah, I do think, I suppose the position I would take is kind of distinct from, say, the Catholic position. So the Catholic position is contraception is wrong outright, based on the, classically on the perverted faculty argument. You are using your sex organs in a way which is deliberately frustrating its natural end. And so it would be analogous to the absolute prohibition on lying, which would be, well, the purpose of statements what a statement is to say something that you believe to be the case. And so if you tell somebody something you know not to be the case and you don't in fact believe, you're using your faculty, you're perverting the end to which the faculty is directed. So I don't think that holds in the case of contraception, because I don't think you necessarily have to make the case that the sex organs need to operate every single time to direct it towards procreation. You can make a more general argument, and if you do, then that opens up the licitness of contraception in certain circumstances. That said, I would then additionally say that, well, yeah, you kind of want to aim at a reasonable family size. I mean, in general societal reasons, is obvious. A lot of proponents of like open door immigration is like, oh no, we don't have any children. We need all these people to work to help fund all these old people that exist. It's like, well, if we had more children ourselves, that wouldn't be a problem because they'd be able to support them. And traditionally, that would be one of the reasons you would have had children, is that, well, you had lots of children, so when you were old, you could be looked after. So now, I haven't known anybody who argues for the strict fertility maximization strategy.
One question, what is Ed Feser's, you've brought up him a number of times, what's Ed Feser's view on the contraception question? Because as you say, the Catholic position is the Catholic position is more or less functionally the fertility maximization position, if I understand.
Okay. Well, I'll distinguish. So Feser would make the case that contraception is wrong because you are using the sex organs contrary to their purpose. You are deliberately frustrating their purpose, and therefore it is wrong to do so on that basis, because the natural directedness of the sex organs is towards procreation, and what you're doing is you are using the sex organs and deliberately frustrating their use at the same time, and therefore is immoral on that basis. The general underlying idea here being that, acting according with your nature is good. Now, you could argue the Catholic position is a fertility maximization position. I don't think it would be. I think that the fertility maximization position would be, even with married couples, would be to say that, well, what you should do is you should make sure you have sex when the woman is at her peak fertility. So the opposite of natural family planning, if that makes sense. You look at the charts and you go, oh no, you are the most fertile today, therefore we must have sex over these days so that we procreate. That would be sort of like a moderate fertility maximization strategy. The other one, obviously, is, whenever I suppose you can make the case it can injure them. I suppose when a female becomes sexually mature, then basically we put you in a room or a house or whatever, and we get men to come in and impregnate you. And you do this until you're too old to have children, then you can stop. So we can try, get like 15 children out of you or something. I suppose that would be the strict fertility maximization, but I don't think anybody would really want to argue that. But I still don't know anybody who makes the moderate fertility maximization position, because the Catholic position would say natural family planning is in principle licit because you aren't directly frustrating. It's just the sex organs are working. Now, whether you think this is a good argument on is another question, but the way they would argue it would be, well, you're not interfering with it. It's just entirely sort of, you're doing it as it were nature intended. It just happens to be doing it at a time where you're less fertile. So you're not sort of directly frustrating the goal in that sense. And so I wouldn't make the claim that the Catholics necessarily the fertility, even the moderate fertility maximization position. I think the moderate fertility maximization position would be that married couple, you deliberately have sex whenever she is fertile, or the most fertile, and then try to have as many children as possible.
It's worth pointing out again that if you look historically, good periods of if this again requires theology, it requires what is the good, what is the bad, and so it's worth pointing out that a lot of air quotes good depending on what you think of industrialization. I'm going to go back to Malthus. It's worth pointing out John Stuart Mill, and this is one of the points that John Gray brought out. John Stuart Mill was somewhat of a low growth Malthus, was a low growth Malthus, and he also thought that contraception was a good thing from my understanding. I cannot quickly pull up the article where John Stuart Mill was quoted here. I might do it in a minute or two, but I would say there's huge positive externalities from having more children than less children. One thing, you get friends, your brothers and sisters, or enemies. I mean, you just must hate your siblings too, sibling rivalry and so forth. So I mean, I'm from a somewhat larger family than most people, at least in the West, probably. So yeah, I do think there's a ton of benefits to having larger families, and I think the small families arguments are always sneakily Malthusian socialistic at their core, which I think is false. And this is another area which I think, as much as some people try to throw at libertarians for not being sufficiently pro-life, I would say libertarians' consumerism or defensive consumers, which is one of our older episodes. If you take the left's argument about, not the left, or some pro-life choice people arguments about about what a child is, in some ways the first number of years of life he's a net consumer of resources. Which it's always strange that the left holds, the pro-choice people hold some of the people hold these views considering what the other things they think about it. They don't think a disabled person is you could make the argument disabled person is just a net consumer of resources, so we should kill him. Now again, Peter Singer actually might hold that view. Maybe. It's not entirely clear. It's not clear. It's worth pointing. So it's not entirely clear on that view. But I do think that children generally have in themselves positive externalities. They're having larger families or generally have positive externalities as well. We saw with China. I don't think the one-child policy is it's gonna weaken them. It's gonna weaken them for better or for worse, depending what your view is on China and its strength and what you want China to be. So yeah, I think booms generally are a good thing, and baby booms are generally a good thing. I don't see any reason why, and I don't think people can really have any more than 20 children. That maybe slightly more, but there's no reason why that you can't find a way to support them. There's no reason why we couldn't continually finding better ways to farm. We use less farmland than we used to use. You can watch Matt Ridley's book, read Matt Ridley's book, Rational Optimists. We grow in the same way computing technology grows. We can grow more with less, thanks to fertilizer, thanks to better methods. Now, this might be an argument for veganism, but even then, we might be able to grow meat in a lab, so forth. So there's plenty of creative ways to come up with more resources. I think libertarians, in their defense of capitalism, dynamism, Schumpeterian creator destruction, effective firms, all are related to fertility maximization or pro-life. So they're related. So I think this gets libertarians off the hook for being in bed with the the abortionists. I mean, I would say any Malthusian is in bed with abortionists as well. I mean, I just take a strictly somewhat pragmatic, somewhat strict. I don't, as well as society. Again, the pro-life people need to be more consistent about what this counts as murder. And I do agree that society is schizophrenic. I just don't entirely think it's all when people are somewhat opportunistic when they when a woman dies who was pregnant in a car accident or a shooting. Let's say it's by a right-wing terrorist, they'll probably point out that they were pregnant. But if it's in some other case, they won't point out. So I agree, society is schizophrenic and opportunistic, but we have to at some point make a claim there. So Swithun, any final comments about what I've said about Malthusian, about the pro-life position and its consistency, as well as libertarianism? I think libertarianism, for related issues, is quite good at defending the pro-life view, because I think ultimately the arguments against it are not necessarily body autonomy. As I stated, the people who actually have the abortions today are mainly people with low time preference or low impulse control, or it's not. There is that small category of people who want to do it, but those are kind of rare. It's sort of a weird issue, and it has declined. I think in the United States the numbers used to be 1 million a year. Now it's like 600,000, and that's with population growth as well. So Swithun, any final comments there? Well, I think we should start wrapping this up.
Yeah, just in England, the figures have gone up, the most ever in 2019, I think, than there has ever been. Well, just pointing out the libertarian argument. I think if you take the position that the fertilized egg is human, then I think the libertarian position really ought to be that Daniel Sanchez holds, which is that abortion should be impermissible except in the cases of rape, because you can take on positive obligations if you take them on voluntarily. And so if you make the claim that, well, if you have sex and this is the result of it, you are then, by nature of your actions, taking on the responsibility if a pregnancy results. So if you do take that view, I think Bloch's position is actually wrong on evictionism, because Bloch takes a sort of purely sort of contractarian position, because that's the way his argument works. Oh, you can't make a contract with the child to be there because the child doesn't exist, because he tries to avoid positive obligations. But I think positive obligations, I don't think it's problematic from a libertarian view that you can take them on. Then the debate would be, when is the fertilized egg a human? So Kinsella is agnostic on that. I think he says it's kind of wrong after 20 weeks. I don't remember the exact date for Kinsella. Lastly, though, I would make an argument that I do think you can make a case against abortion even in the case of rape. Now, this goes beyond sort of just voluntary positive obligations. But if you imagine a situation in which a woman was raped and then she was impregnated, but then she was in a coma for 9 months, but then the rapist died, he was executed. Does anybody have an obligation to, and then after the child is born, the woman wakes up, does anybody actually have an obligation to sort of feed the child or keep it alive? I think intuitively someone probably does, and the obvious individual there would be the mother, at least in the first instance, because we'll have this dependent child, but the nature of the children is that they're dependent on adults to survive. So there is kind of an obligation there, even if it's not taken on voluntarily. That doesn't follow that they can't sort of get it for adoption or anything like that, but that an obligation would exist even if it wasn't taken on voluntarily. So I think that would, even in the hard case of rape, actually still give us a justification for why abortion would be impermissible, even in the case of rape, which is one that they tend to bring up. And as an aside, just on the numbers of women who have abortions because of rapes, it's basically non-existent. Most of it is to do with quote unquote mental health of the woman, at least in England, 98%. And that just basically means I don't want it. So that would be, I think, something worthy of note. Tim, any final comments?
Oh, here's the quote from Mill. If the earth must lose that great portion of its pleasantness which owes its things that the unlimited increase of wealth and population must eliminate from it, for the mere purpose of a larger but not a better or happy population, I sincerely hope for the sake of posterity that they will be content to be stationary long before necessity compels them to it. Interestingly, John Stuart Mill, this is from John Stuart Mill's book on political comment, I think written in 1848, he spent a night in prison for distributing pamphlets to working class women. So, I mean, John Stuart Mill was a sort of neo-Malthusian in this regard, and as I stated, we've met Ridley's arguments and some of the arguments we might make about climate change and all those other population growth. They're largely false. I mean, maybe there's an example of them happening, but overall, your point about bringing on positive obligation, that's true. Although then the question becomes who exactly enforces those positive obligations and what exactly are the positive obligations of children? What exactly are your children owed from their parents and so forth. But I enjoyed doing this episode, and thanks for doing it. And yeah, hopefully I was sufficiently I was pro-choice, but I think I'm sufficiently politically incorrect pro-choice. Well, Swithun?
Yes, I mean, when you did make an interesting case for that. Just with the positive obligations, yeah, I mean, the question how far the positive obligations go. But I mean, in the case of, which I didn't extend with the arguments, like, well, a child is in the utero in mother. It does cause some discomfort for pregnancy. But is it really an overstretch of an obligation not to evict it from the natural habitat? That seems to be a relatively minor obligation. And obviously, what you owe a child is going to be dependent on the circumstance. I mean, it could be a case you might not actually be able to feed your children because you don't have any food. I mean, is that morally reprehensible? You can't feed them. Well, not necessarily if there was no food around and there was a famine. But I mean, at least minimally, at least to me, doesn't seem to be onerous.
That's an argument. That's an argument against famines, not an argument.
Well, exactly. Yeah. But just in the case of how does the positive obligation work, and then of course you get the enforcement arguments and things with abortions and stuff like that. I think that's one. I was say back to the pro-life position. One of the reasons why the UK and US don't want to prosecute women is because, well, the women could have had a spontaneous abortion. People think it's actually one, so we don't want to do that. We just want to go for the obvious ones where they've gone to an abortion doctor. So that could be a claim there. But this was very enjoyable from my end. I'd just like to thank everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or via us on Podbean. The more subscribers we get, the higher we get up. And please share with your friends and family who may find this of interest. And if you would like to get into contact with the show with ideas or comments, please contact us at mindscrimelibertyshow@gmail.com. That's mindscrimelibertyshow@gmail.com.